Behind the golden gates of Buckingham Palace, where tradition meets modern royalty, a storm was brewing that would shake the very foundations of the British monarchy. What started as whispered conversations in palace corridors would soon explode into a full-scale family crisis that threatened to tear apart everything the royal family had worked to rebuild. When King Charles made a decision that would forever change his relationship with Queen Camilla, nobody could have predicted the devastating consequences that would follow. This is the untold story of power, family loyalty, betrayal, and the price of wearing the crown when personal feelings clash with royal duty. The world thought they knew the story of Charles and Camilla's journey to the throne, but what happened behind closed doors during their first year as king and queen would reveal truths that palace officials desperately tried to keep hidden. Some secrets are too powerful to remain buried, and some wounds run too deep to heal with time. This is that story, raw, emotional, and utterly human despite the royal titles involved. The morning started like any other at Clarence House, with Queen Camilla sipping her Earl Grey tea while reviewing the day's schedule with her private secretary, Margaret Thornton. Sunlight filtered through the elegant windows, casting warm patterns across the Persian rugs that had been carefully selected to create an atmosphere of understated luxury. Camilla had grown comfortable in this routine over the past 18 months since becoming queen, finding solace in the predictable rhythm of royal duties and personal moments. Your Majesty, the charity luncheon is at 2 o'clock, followed by the hospital visit at 4, Margaret said, her voice carrying the crisp efficiency that had made her invaluable to the Queen's household. And don't forget, your sister Annabelle is flying in from Scotland this evening for tomorrow's family gathering. Camilla's face brightened at the mention of her sister. Despite all the protocol and ceremony that now surrounded her life, family remained her anchor to normalcy. Annabelle Elliot had been her closest confidant through every challenge, from her difficult divorce decades ago to the years of public scrutiny as Charles's companion, and, finally, to her acceptance as queen consort. Wonderful, Camilla replied, setting down her teacup with a gentle clink against the saucer. I've missed her terribly. It feels like months since we've had a proper conversation without someone hovering nearby taking notes. What Camilla didn't know was that at that very moment, King Charles was in an emergency meeting with his most trusted advisors in his private study at Buckingham Palace. The room was thick with tension as Sir Clive Alderton, the king's principal private secretary, spread several newspapers across the mahogany desk. Each headline screamed variations of the same story that had broken just hours earlier. Your Majesty, we need to address this immediately, Sir Clive said, his usually calm demeanor showing cracks of concern. The photographs are quite damaging, and the story is gaining traction across all media platforms. Charles stared at the images that would soon send shockwaves through his marriage and the monarchy itself. There, in high-definition color, was Camilla's younger brother, Mark Shand, at what appeared to be an exclusive private party in Monaco. The photographs showed him in compromising situations with several young women, drinks flowing freely, and, most damaging of all, what appeared to be illegal substances on nearby tables. But it wasn't just the obvious scandal that concerned the king's advisors. Intelligence reports suggested that Mark had been sharing private information about the royal family's security arrangements and personal schedules with questionable contacts in exchange for access to high society parties and financial benefits. The implications were staggering. How long has this been going on? Charles asked, his voice carrying a weight that seemed to age him before their eyes. We believe at least 6 months, Your Majesty, replied Commander James Morrison from the Royal Protection Squad. Our sources indicate he's been trading information about Her Majesty's movements, your private conversations, and even details about Prince William's children's school routines. Charles felt his world tilting. The brother-in-law he had welcomed into the family fold, the man Camilla adored and defended fiercely, had been systematically betraying their trust and potentially putting the entire royal family at risk. There's more, sir, Sir Clive continued reluctantly. Financial records show that Mr. Shand has been receiving substantial payments from several tabloid newspapers and international media outlets. Some of the most private stories about your marriage, Your Majesty, appear to have originated from him. The king's hands clenched involuntarily as he remembered recent headlines that had cut particularly deep. Stories about his health concerns, private arguments with Camilla, and even details about their intimate conversations had found their way into print. He had assumed palace staff leaks or long-lens photography were to blame, never suspecting that the betrayal came from within their own family. Meanwhile, at Clarence House, Camilla was blissfully unaware of the storm gathering around her. She spent the morning responding to letters from well-wishers, a task she genuinely enjoyed despite her staff's attempts to limit her personal involvement. Each handwritten response felt like a small rebellion against the institutional machinery that sometimes threatened to overwhelm her human instincts. Her lady-in-waiting, Sarah Keswick, noticed the Queen's particularly cheerful mood as they prepared for the afternoon's engagements. "You seem especially happy today, ma'am," Sarah observed as she helped Camilla select jewelry for the charity luncheon. "I suppose I am," Camilla replied, fastening a simple string of pearls that had belonged to her grandmother. "Charles seems so relaxed this morning, and, with Annabelle coming tonight, it feels like we might actually have a normal family evening for once." The irony of her words would become painfully clear within hours. At the charity luncheon for childhood literacy, Camilla was in her element. She had always been passionate about education and reading, finding genuine purpose in these engagements beyond mere royal duty. As she listened to children read their favorite stories aloud, her phone buzzed insistently in her handbag. Her private secretary discreetly checked it, and her face paled. "Ma'am," Margaret whispered urgently during a brief pause in the program. "His Majesty needs to speak with you immediately." "It's quite urgent." Camilla's stomach clenched. In their years together, Charles rarely interrupted her public engagements unless something was seriously wrong. The last time had been when her elderly mother suffered a heart attack, and, before that, when his own cancer diagnosis was confirmed. "Children," she said with a warm smile that betrayed none of her growing anxiety, "I'm afraid I need to step away for just a moment. Please continue reading to Miss Thompson here. I want to hear all about your favorite characters when I return." But she wouldn't return. In the corridor outside the community center, her protection officer handed her a secure phone with Charles already on the line. "Darling, I need you to come home immediately." His voice was strained in a way she hadn't heard since the darkest days following his mother's death. "Don't go to the hospital visit. Have your protection team bring you straight to the palace." "Charles, what's happened?" "You're frightening me." "It's about Mark," he said simply, and something in those 3 words made Camilla's blood run cold. The journey back to Buckingham Palace felt endless despite London traffic being unusually light. Camilla's mind raced through possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Had something happened to her brother? An accident? A health crisis? She tried calling Mark's number repeatedly, but it went straight to voicemail. When she arrived at the palace, the atmosphere was unlike anything she had experienced in her 18 months as queen. Staff members who usually greeted her warmly avoided eye contact. The usual bustle of activities seemed muted, charged with intention that made her skin crawl. Charles was waiting for her in their private sitting room, and one look at his face told her that whatever had happened was worse than any of her worst-case scenarios. Behind him stood Sir Clive and Commander Morrison, their expressions grim and uncomfortable. "Camilla, please sit down," Charles said gently, but she could hear the steel beneath his compassion. "Just tell me," she said, remaining standing. "Whatever it is, just tell me." Charles handed her the newspapers, and Camilla felt her legs give way as she saw her brother's face splashed across the front pages. But, as she read the accompanying articles, shock gave way to confusion and, then, to fierce defensiveness. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice rising. "Mark would never. These photos could be from anywhere, taken at any time. You know how these papers manipulate things." "Camilla," Charles said quietly, "there's more." Commander Morrison stepped forward with a tablet displaying financial records, phone logs, and what appeared to be audio recordings. As he explained the evidence they had gathered, Camilla's world crumbled piece by piece. "He's been paid over £200,000 in the last year alone," the commander said matter-of-factly. "The recordings are quite clear about what he was providing in exchange." Camilla listened to excerpts of conversations where Mark bragged about his access to the royal family, shared details about security protocols, and even laughed about Camilla's boring charity work and Charles's health problems. Each word felt like a physical blow. "But he's my brother," she whispered, as if that simple fact could somehow erase the mountain of evidence before her. "Yes," Charles replied, and his next words would echo in her mind for months to come. "And that makes this betrayal even more unforgivable." The room fell silent except for the ticking of an antique clock that had witnessed decades of royal family dramas. But this felt different, more personal, and devastating than political scandals or constitutional crises. "What does this mean?" Camilla asked, though she was beginning to understand that her life as she knew it was about to change dramatically. Charles looked at his advisors, then, back at his wife. "It means, my darling, that we have some very difficult decisions to make. And I'm afraid those decisions are going to hurt people you love." Outside, news vans were already gathering at the palace gates, their satellite dishes pointing skyward like mechanical vultures waiting to feast on royal pain. The story was breaking globally, and within hours, every detail of Mark Shan's betrayal would be dissected by experts and amateurs alike. But inside the palace walls, a king was about to make a choice that would test the very foundations of his marriage and force his wife to choose between her family and her crown. The perfect storm that had been building for months was about to make landfall, and nobody could predict what would be left standing when it passed. The emergency meeting that followed would be remembered as one of the most difficult in the modern monarchy's history. Charles had dismissed his advisors after presenting Camilla with the evidence, leaving the royal couple alone to confront a crisis that threatened everything they had built together. Camilla sat in stunned silence, the damning documents scattered across their coffee table like pieces of a shattered life. Her hands trembled as she picked up photograph after photograph of Mark at various social gatherings, each image now taking on sinister new meanings. The brother she thought she knew, the man who had walked her down the aisle at Westminster Abbey just over a year ago, had been systematically destroying her new life from the shadows. "I need to call him," she said finally, reaching for her phone with shaking fingers. "There has to be an explanation. Maybe someone forced him, or threatened him, or—" "Camilla, stop." Charles's voice was gentle but firm. "I know this is devastating, but we both heard those recordings. Mark wasn't coerced. He was boasting about it." The truth hit her like a physical blow. In the audio clips, Mark's voice had carried the casual arrogance of someone who believed he was untouchable, protected by his sister's position. He had joked about Charles's private fears regarding his health, mocked Camilla's attempts to find her place in the royal family, and even shared details about security measures protecting the grandchildren. "He called me desperate for approval and said I was trying too hard to be Diana," Camilla whispered, the recorded words echoing in her memory. "My own brother said that about me to strangers, for money." Charles moved to sit beside her, but for the first time in their decades together, Camilla pulled away from his touch. The physical distance between them seemed to represent something much larger breaking apart. "What happens now?" she asked, though she dreaded the answer. Charles stood and walked to the window overlooking the palace gardens where tourists gathered daily, hoping for glimpses of royal life. Soon, they would be hungry for details about this scandal, and the media machine would feed them every morsel of pain and betrayal it could find. "The security implications alone are staggering," he said, his voice taking on the measured tone he used for state business. "Mark had access to information about William's children's schedules. He knew when you would be traveling alone. He even had details about our medical appointments and security protocols." Camilla felt sick. The children. Oh God, Charles. What if something had happened to George or Charlotte or Louis because of information Mark shared? "Thank God it didn't," Charles replied. "But the potential was there. Commander Morrison briefed me on several incidents over the past months where photographers seemed to know exactly where you would be, despite our best efforts to keep your movements private. Now we know why." The king turned to face his wife, and she could see the struggle in his eyes between his love for her and his duty to the crown. "The Privy Council is demanding immediate action," he continued. "They want Mark arrested on charges of breaching national security. The Home Secretary is threatening a full investigation that could expose every detail of this betrayal to public scrutiny." "But that would destroy our family," Camilla protested. "Annabelle, the children, Mark's ex-wife. This would hurt so many innocent people." "Yes," Charles agreed quietly, "which is why I've negotiated an alternative." The word alternative hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that Camilla was only beginning to understand. "What kind of alternative?" Charles returned to his chair, but instead of sitting beside her as usual, he chose the seat directly across from her. The formal distance felt like a chasm. "Mark agrees to a complete and permanent break from the family. No contact with you, no attendance at any royal functions, no use of his connection to the monarchy for business or social purposes. He leaves the country within 72 hours and doesn't return without express permission from the palace." "That's exile," Camilla said, her voice barely audible. "Yes, it is." The reality of what Charles was proposing began to sink in. Mark would become a ghost, erased from their lives as if he had never existed. No more holiday gatherings, no more Sunday phone calls, No more of the easy family banter that had been one of Camilla's greatest comforts in adjusting to royal life. And if I refuse to agree to this, she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Charles's expression became that of a king rather than a husband. Then, the palace cannot guarantee your continued security clearance for sensitive information. You would be excluded from state business, security briefings, and certain family activities that involve classified information. The words hit her like a slap. You would exile me too. I would have no choice, Charles said. And she could hear the pain in his voice despite his formal tone. The institution must be protected, Camilla. The monarchy survived my mother's death, the scandals of the 1990s, and even my own mistakes, but it cannot survive a security breach from within the inner circle. Camilla stood abruptly, pacing to the window where Charles had been standing moments earlier. Below, she could see the first news crews setting up their cameras, preparing to broadcast her private agony to the world. So my choice is to destroy my brother or watch you destroy me, she said bitterly. Your choice, Charles corrected, is to stand with your duty to the crown and the country, or to stand with someone who has already betrayed both. The stark simplicity of his statement was devastating. There was no middle ground, no compromise that would preserve both her marriage and her family relationships. Mark's actions had created a situation where any choice would involve profound loss. I need time to think, she said. I'm afraid time is a luxury we don't have, Charles replied. The story breaks in full tomorrow morning. By then, we need to have a unified response, or the palace will proceed with the criminal charges against Mark. The timeline was impossibly short, clearly designed to prevent her from finding ways to protect her brother while preserving her position. It was an ultimatum disguised as a choice, and they both knew it. Has anyone told Mark what's happening? She asked. Commander Morrison is with him now, Charles said. He's being offered the same choice, voluntary exile or criminal prosecution. Camilla's mind raced to imagine her younger brother, probably hungover from whatever party the photographs had captured, suddenly, faced with royal protection officers and charges that could send him to prison. Despite everything he had done, her instinct was still to protect him. Can I speak to him? Before he decides. Charles hesitated. That might not be wise. If you're seen as influencing his decision, it could be construed as obstruction of justice. The careful legal language told her everything she needed to know. Mark was already beyond her reach, cut off from family support as effectively as if he were already in exile. A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Sir Clive entered with visible reluctance. Your Majesties, forgive the intrusion, but there are urgent calls from the Prime Minister, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and the Governor-General of Australia. The Commonwealth realms are requesting immediate clarification about the security implications. The scope of the crisis was expanding beyond their personal family drama. The stability of the monarchy across multiple nations was now at stake, making Camilla's personal anguish seem almost selfish in comparison. Give us 5 more minutes, Charles instructed, and Sir Clive withdrew with obvious relief at not having to witness more of their private conversation. Alone again, husband and wife faced each other across a divide that felt wider than the Atlantic Ocean. I love him, Camilla said simply. For 30 years, he's been the one person who treated me exactly the same whether I was a divorced single mother or the Queen of England. He's been my constant through every change, every challenge. And I love you, Charles replied. But Mark made his choice when he decided to profit from betraying us. I won't let his greed destroy what we've built or endanger our family's safety. Camilla closed her eyes, trying to imagine Christmas without Mark's terrible jokes, birthdays without his last-minute but thoughtful gifts, quiet moments without his irreverent commentary that helped her maintain perspective on royal absurdities. He had been her bridge between her old life and her new one, and now that bridge was being demolished. What if he promises never to do it again? What if we can get him help, therapy, something to address whatever drove him to this? It's too late for that, Charles said with finality. The damage is done, and the trust is broken beyond repair. The institution cannot take that risk again. The coldness in her husband's voice frightened her. This was the king speaking, not the man who had waited decades to marry her, who had defied his mother and public opinion to make her his queen. In this moment, she understood that the crown would always come first, even before their love. I need to call Annabelle, she said. She's flying in tonight, expecting a family dinner. She needs to know what's happening before she arrives to find her brother destroyed and her sister forced to choose between impossible options. Of course, Charles agreed. But, Camilla, Whatever you decide about Mark, please remember that I never wanted this choice to exist. If there had been any other way. She looked at the man she had loved for over 3 decades, seeing him clearly perhaps for the first time since becoming queen. The weight of kingship had changed him in subtle but profound ways, creating boundaries around his heart that even she could not cross when duty demanded sacrifice. I know, she said quietly, but knowing that doesn't make this any easier. As evening approached, and Annabelle's flight prepared to land at Heathrow, Camilla still had not given her answer. But everyone in the palace understood that when morning came, the royal family would look very different than it had 24 hours earlier, and the cost of protecting the crown was about to become devastatingly personal for the woman who wore it. Annabelle Elliot arrived at Clarence House just after 8 o'clock that evening, her usual bright energy immediately dimming when she saw her sister's devastated expression. For 47 years, the two women had been each other's closest allies, sharing secrets, supporting each other through divorces, deaths, and the unprecedented journey of Camilla's transformation from private citizen to queen. What's happened? Annabelle asked immediately, dropping her overnight bag in the foyer and pulling Camilla into a fierce embrace. You look absolutely shattered. Camilla couldn't speak at first. Seeing her sister's concerned face, unmarked by the knowledge of what was coming, made her feel sick with the burden of what she had to share. In a few minutes, Annabelle's world would be turned upside down just as thoroughly as her own had been. It's Mark, she managed finally. Oh, Annabelle, it's so much worse than anything we could have imagined. They sat in Camilla's private sitting room, the same space where she had received the devastating news just hours earlier. As Camilla explained the evidence, the betrayal, and the impossible choice she faced, she watched her sister's expression cycle through disbelief, shock, anger, and, finally, a grief that seemed to age her before Camilla's eyes. 200,000 pounds, Annabelle repeated numbly. He sold our family's privacy for 200,000 pounds. It wasn't just privacy, Camilla said quietly. He compromised security for William's children. He shared details that could have put them in danger. Annabelle's hands flew to her mouth. As a grandmother herself, the implications hit her with devastating force. The children. Oh God, Charlotte and George and little Louis. How could he be so reckless? I don't know, Camilla admitted. I keep trying to understand what drove him to this, but the recordings. Annabelle, he was laughing about it. He called it easy money from the gullible royals. The sisters sat in silence for several long minutes, each lost in memories of the brother they thought they knew. Mark had always been impulsive, sometimes irresponsible with money, occasionally thoughtless in his pursuit of a good time. But this level of calculated betrayal seemed incomprehensible. What are Charles's demands? Annabelle asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected. Exile. Permanent separation from the family. He leaves the country within 3 days and never returns without palace permission. And if you refuse? Then I become a security risk myself, Camilla said bitterly. Charles was very clear about that. The crown comes first, always. Annabelle studied her sister's face carefully. And what does your heart tell you to do? The question broke something inside Camilla that had been barely holding together all day. My heart tells me to fight for my brother, to find a way to protect him while still honoring my duties to the monarchy. But my head tells me that he's already made his choice, and now I have to make mine. Have you spoken to him directly? I'm not allowed to. Charles says it could be seen as obstruction of justice if I influence Mark's decision about accepting exile versus facing criminal charges. The legalistic barriers being erected around their family relationships felt like a Cold War tactic, designed to prevent emotional appeals from interfering with institutional necessities. This is impossible, Annabelle said finally. Charles is asking you to choose between being a sister and being a queen. No one should have to make that choice. But someone does, Camilla replied. And that someone is me. As if summoned by their conversation, Charles appeared in the doorway. His expression was carefully neutral, but Camilla could see the strain around his eyes that betrayed how difficult this situation was for him as well. Annabelle, he greeted his sister-in-law warmly, though the warmth felt forced. I'm sorry your visit has coincided with such an unpleasant situation. Charles, Annabelle replied, her voice cooler than usual. I understand you have an impossible job, but surely there must be some alternative to destroying our family. If there were, don't you think I would prefer it? Charles sat down across from both women, his formal posture making clear that this was a conversation between monarch and subjects rather than in-laws. Mark's actions have created ripple effects across the Commonwealth. I've spent the afternoon on calls with heads of state who are questioning whether our security protocols can be trusted. So you sacrifice Mark to reassure politicians? Annabelle's protective instincts for her siblings was overriding her usual deference to royal protocol. I sacrifice Mark to protect the institution that serves 65 million British citizens and billions more across the Commonwealth, Charles corrected firmly. Personal feelings cannot override institutional stability. Camilla watched the exchange between her husband and sister with growing despair. These were the two people she loved most outside of her children and grandchildren, and they were positioning themselves on opposite sides of an unbridgeable divide. Has Mark given his answer? She asked. He has accepted the terms of exile rather than face prosecution, Charles replied. He leaves for Monaco tomorrow evening. The matter-of-fact delivery of this information felt like a death announcement. Camilla's brother would essentially cease to exist as far as the royal family was concerned, becoming a ghost that could never return. And what about the rest of us? Annabelle asked. Am I going to be investigated? Are my children going to be scrutinized because of their uncle's mistakes? The investigation is focusing solely on Mark's actions, Charles assured her. However, there will likely be enhanced security protocols around family gatherings for the foreseeable future. The clinical language couldn't disguise the reality that their family relationships would never be the same. Casual dinners, spontaneous phone calls, and intimate family celebrations would all be filtered through security concerns and institutional oversight. A knock at the door interrupted them, and Sir Clive entered with obvious reluctance to intrude on the family conversation. Your Majesty, forgive the interruption, but the press office needs your decision about tomorrow's statement. The morning papers are already running speculative stories, and we need to get ahead of the narrative. Charles looked at his wife expectantly. Camilla, the weight of decisions settled on her shoulders like a physical burden. In her mind, she could see Mark as a child, always getting into trouble but quick to defend his sisters when others criticized them. She could see him at her wedding to Andrew Parker Bowles decades ago, nervous but proud as he walked beside her. She could see him at her coronation, tears in his eyes as he watched her accept the crown that now demanded his exile. But she could also hear those recorded conversations where he mocked her efforts, dismissed her pain, and treated her family's safety as a commodity to be sold to the highest bidder. I stand with the crown, she said quietly, each word feeling like a small death. Mark made his choice when he betrayed our trust. I cannot and will not prioritize personal relationships over the safety and stability of the monarchy. The room fell silent except for the scratch of Sir Clive's pen as he made notes for the press statement. Annabelle stared at her sister with an expression Camilla couldn't quite read, while Charles nodded with what might have been relief or regret. I'll draft a statement expressing your support for the security investigation and your commitment to the integrity of the institution, Sir Clive said carefully. Should there be any mention of personal regret or family loyalty? No, Camilla said firmly, surprising everyone including herself. The statement should focus entirely on institutional responsibilities. Personal feelings have no place in matters of national security. After Sir Clive left to prepare the statement, the three of them sat in uncomfortable silence. Outside, they could hear the distant sounds of London traffic and the occasional call of photographers still gathered at the palace gates, waiting for any sign of the drama unfolding within. I should go, Annabelle said finally. This feels like a conversation between a king and queen, not a family discussion. Please don't leave, Camilla said urgently. I need my sister tonight, not just royal protocol. But which sister? Annabelle asked sadly. The one who would fight heaven and earth to protect her brother, or the one who just chose duty over family? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Camilla realized that in choosing to support Charles's ultimatum, she hadn't just lost Mark. She had fundamentally changed who she was in relationship to the people who had loved her longest. Both, she said finally. I'm both, and that's what makes this so painful. Charles excused himself to make calls to Commonwealth leaders, leaving the sisters alone for what would be their last honest conversation as they had known each other. By morning, duty would have built walls between them that personal affection might never fully overcome. Do you think Mark knows what he's cost us? Annabelle asked. I think Mark only ever thought about Mark, Camilla replied, the admission bitter but honest. And maybe that's what I should have seen sooner. As midnight approached, marking the beginning of what would become known as the most difficult 24 hours of the new king's reign, both sisters understood that their family, as they had known it, was ending. Tomorrow would bring public statements, media scrutiny, and the beginning of a new reality where royal duty had permanently trumped family loyalty. The price of the crown, they were learning, was sometimes higher than anyone could anticipate. The morning headlines were even more brutal than anyone had anticipated. By 6 o'clock, every major newspaper in Britain and dozens of international publications had splashed the story across their front pages with variations of Queen's brother betrays royal family and palace security breach rocks monarchy. Camilla sat in her private study at Clarence House, surrounded by the newspapers that her press secretary had reluctantly brought to her attention. Each publication had found a different angle to exploit the scandal, from Mark's financial troubles to speculation about what other family secrets might have been sold to the media. The Times had obtained exclusive quotes from the recorded conversations, including Mark's dismissive comments about Camilla's intelligence and his crude jokes about Charles's age and health concerns. The Daily Mail had somehow acquired photographs from private family gatherings, now presented with sinister overtones suggesting they had been provided by Mark as proof of his access to royal intimacy. Most devastating of all, The Guardian had published a timeline showing how Mark's information had coincided with security breaches and paparazzi appearances that had endangered not just Camilla, but Prince William's children during their school activities and family outings. The public reaction is significant, Margaret Thornton said carefully as she briefed the Queen on the morning's developments. The palace phone lines are overwhelmed with calls, both supportive and critical. Critical of what, exactly? Camilla asked, though she dreaded the answer. Some are questioning why the palace allowed Mr. Shand such close access for so long. Others are suggesting that your judgment in family matters raises questions about your fitness for the role of queen. The accusation hit Camilla like a physical blow. After 18 months of working tirelessly to prove herself worthy of the crown, to show that she understood the gravity of her responsibilities, she was being blamed for trusting her own brother. "What does the polling show?" she asked, her voice barely steady. Margaret hesitated. "Your approval ratings have dropped 15 points overnight. The monarchy's overall approval has dropped 7 points. It's not good, ma'am." Across London at Buckingham Palace, Charles was dealing with a constitutional crisis that threatened to overshadow even the personal family drama. The Prime Minister had called an emergency meeting of the National Security Council, while the Home Secretary was demanding a full review of royal security protocols. The Australian Prime Minister has expressed grave concerns about the security implications for the Commonwealth, Sir Clive reported during Charles's morning briefing. The Canadian government is requesting a formal briefing on what information may have been compromised about their state visits. Charles rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of the crown more heavily than at any time since his mother's death. "What about the public response?" "Mixed, Your Majesty. There's sympathy for Your Majesty and the Queen having been betrayed by a family member, but also anger about the security failures and questions about whether this could happen again." And Parliament. The opposition is calling for a full parliamentary inquiry into royal security arrangements. Some backbenchers are questioning whether the monarchy has become too informal, too accessible to potentially compromising influences. The political ramifications were spiraling beyond anything Charles had anticipated. What had begun as a family crisis was now threatening the institutional foundations that he had sworn to protect. Meanwhile, at a small hotel near Heathrow Airport, Mark Shand was experiencing his own version of hell. Stripped of his royal protection and facing a media siege, he sat alone in an anonymous room, watching his life's destruction play out on television screens around the world. His phone rang constantly with calls from journalists offering substantial sums for exclusive interviews. Each offer was tempting, not because he needed more money, but because the isolation was becoming unbearable. His own family had cut him off completely, and his former social circle had abandoned him the moment the scandal broke. The man who had once boasted about his royal connections was now discovering how shallow those relationships had been. Friends who had courted his company for access to royal gossip were nowhere to be found when he needed support. Business associates who had valued his insider knowledge were terminating contracts and distancing themselves from any association with him. A knock at his hotel room door made him freeze. Through the peephole, he could see Commander Morrison and another officer from the Royal Protection Squad. "Mr. Shand, we need to escort you to the airport. Your flight to Monaco departs in 3 hours." The finality of it was crushing. In a few hours, he would be on a plane to permanent exile, cut off from everything that had defined his identity for 63 years. No more Christmas mornings with his family, no more grandchildren's birthday parties, no more casual phone calls with his sisters. Can I write a letter to Camilla? Something private, not for the media?" I'm afraid that's not possible, sir. Any communication with members of the royal family must go through official channels and would be subject to review. Even the simple human gesture of apologizing to his sister was being denied to him. The palace machinery that he had betrayed was now systematically erasing him from their lives with the efficiency of a military operation. Back at Clarence's house, Camilla was preparing for what would be her first public appearance since the scandal broke. A children's hospital visit that had been scheduled for weeks couldn't be canceled without sending the wrong message about her commitment to her duties, but everyone understood that the reception would be unlike anything she had experienced as queen. "Are you certain you want to proceed with this engagement, ma'am?" her private secretary asked for the third time. "We could cite illness or urgent state business." "No," Camilla said firmly, though her hands shook as she applied her makeup. "If I hide from the public now, I'll never recover their trust. Better to face whatever comes than to look like I'm ashamed or guilty of something." The decision was brave, but costly. As her car pulled up to the hospital, the usual small crowd of well-wishers was notably absent. Instead, a handful of protesters held signs reading "Queen of Betrayal" and "Royal Security Failure." The contrast with her usual warm receptions was stark and painful. Inside the hospital, the children and medical staff were welcoming as always, providing a brief refuge from the storm outside. But even there, Camilla could sense the difference in how the adults interacted with her. There was a new formality, a careful distance that hadn't existed before. "Your Majesty," said Dr. Sarah Peterson, the hospital's chief administrator, "we're so grateful you decided to continue with today's visit despite everything." The carefully chosen words spoke volumes about how the scandal was being perceived even by those who worked closely with the royal family. Camilla's decision to appear publicly was seen as an act of courage rather than the natural fulfillment of her duties. During a quiet moment between patient visits, Camilla checked her phone to find a text from her daughter Laura. "Mom, I'm so sorry about Uncle Mark. Tom and I are here if you need anything. The children are asking questions, but we're handling it." The reminder of how the scandal was affecting her grandchildren brought fresh pain. 8-year-old Eliza and 6-year-old Louis would have to navigate playground questions about their step-grandmother's criminal brother and learn early lessons about how public life could destroy private happiness. That evening, as news programs broadcast footage of Mark boarding his flight to Monaco, Camilla sat alone in her study writing in her private journal, one of the few spaces left where she could be honest about her feelings without institutional oversight. "Today I chose duty over blood, crown over family," she wrote. "Charles says it was the only choice possible, and intellectually I know he's right. Mark's betrayal endangered people we love and threatened the stability of an institution that serves millions. But knowing something is right doesn't make it hurt less. I keep thinking about Christmas, about birthdays, about all the family moments that will now have an empty chair where Mark used to sit. Will Annabelle ever forgive me for choosing Charles's ultimatum over fighting for our brother? Will I ever forgive myself? The hardest part is that I can see both sides so clearly. Mark was wrong, terribly, unforgivably wrong, to betray our trust and endanger innocent people. But he's still my little brother, and some part of me will always wonder if I should have found a way to save him instead of saving the monarchy." A soft knock interrupted her writing. Charles entered without waiting for permission, a breach of protocol that told her how worried he was about her emotional state. "How are you holding up?" he asked gently, sitting beside her for the first time since the crisis began. "I'm surviving," she replied, closing her journal. The hospital visit was difficult, but the children were wonderful as always. And the protesters? Small group, but loud enough. "I suppose I should get used to that for a while." Charles reached for her hand, and for a moment they sat in comfortable silence, remembering what their relationship had been like before duty and crisis had driven wedges between them. "Do you regret your choice?" he asked quietly. Camilla considered the question carefully. "I regret that the choice had to be made at all. I regret that Mark put us in this position. I regret that politics and security concerns have to overshadow family relationships. But do you regret choosing to support the crown's position?" "No," she said, surprised by her own certainty. "Much as it hurts, much as I'll probably grieve for the rest of my life, I couldn't live with myself if my personal feelings had resulted in danger to William's children or damage to an institution that means so much to so many people." As they prepared for bed that night, both understood that they had survived the crisis, but that the cost would be permanent. Mark was gone, family relationships were forever altered, and Camilla's public image had been damaged in ways that might never fully heal. But They had also discovered something important about their marriage and their shared commitment to the crown. When forced to choose between personal desires and institutional duties, they had stood together, even when that choice brought devastating personal pain. The price of their decision would be paid for years to come. But the alternative, watching the monarchy crumble because of one man's greed and betrayal, had been unthinkable. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions about security and trust. But tonight, a king and queen faced the darkness together, united by duty even when that unity came at the cost of everything else they had once held dear. 6 months after Mark Shan's exile, the scars from the betrayal were still visible across the royal family. But something unexpected had begun to emerge from the wreckage. The crisis that had threatened to destroy Camilla's queenship had instead revealed depths of character that even her harshest critics couldn't ignore. The transformation began gradually, noticed first by the palace staff who worked closest to the queen. Where once she had sometimes seemed uncertain about her role, seeking approval for decisions that were clearly within her authority, she now moved with a quiet confidence that spoke of hard-won wisdom. Her Majesty has changed, observed Margaret Thornton during a private conversation with other senior staff members. She's more decisive, more willing to make difficult choices when they serve the greater good. The pain of what happened with her brother has somehow made her stronger, not weaker. The change was most visible in Camilla's approach to her charitable work. Rather than simply lending her name to causes that others selected for her, she had begun identifying issues that resonated with her personal experiences, particularly focusing on families affected by betrayal and addiction, problems that had touched her own life in ways the public was only beginning to understand. Her first major initiative was a foundation supporting families dealing with substance abuse and financial crime, issues that she now understood intimately. The announcement was carefully crafted to avoid direct references to Mark, but those who knew the family history understood the personal motivation behind her passion for these causes. I have learned that families can survive almost any crisis if they hold on to what matters most, she said during the foundation's launch event. But sometimes survival requires making choices that seem impossible, choosing principles over convenience, duty over comfort. The speech was widely praised for its honesty and emotional depth, marking a turning point in public perception of the Queen. Instead of seeing her as a privileged woman who had never faced real hardship, people began to recognize her as someone who had sacrificed family relationships to protect innocent children and preserve public trust. Charles watched his wife's transformation with a mixture of pride and sadness. The woman he loved had emerged from their crisis stronger and more purposeful, but he knew the cost had been enormous. The easy laughter that had once characterized their private moments had been replaced by a more thoughtful, sometimes melancholy presence that reflected her permanent sense of loss. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had chosen differently?" she asked him one evening as they walked through the gardens at Highgrove, their country retreat where some of their happiest memories had been made. "Every day," he admitted. "But wondering doesn't change the fact that we made the only choice we could live with." Mark forced our hand. "Camilla, we didn't destroy our family, he did." "I know that intellectually," she replied, stopping to examine roses that needed deadheading. "But knowing something and feeling it are different things. I still wake up some mornings and think about calling him before I remember that he's gone." The conversation was interrupted by a call from their private secretary. Annabelle was asking to see Camilla privately, the first time she had requested a meeting since the immediate aftermath of the scandal. The reunion between the sisters was awkward at first, both women changed by months of separation and grief. Annabelle looked older, worn down by the stress of watching her family implode and dealing with media attention that had extended to her own children and grandchildren. "I've been angry with you," Annabelle said without preamble as they sat in Camilla's private sitting room. "For months, I've been furious that you chose Charles's ultimatum over fighting for Mark." Camilla braced herself for the confrontation she had been dreading. "But I've also been watching the news," Annabelle continued, "and I've seen what you've done since then. The foundation, the speeches about family resilience, the way you've used your pain to help other people facing impossible choices." "It doesn't bring him back," Camilla said quietly. "No, it doesn't. But it shows that his betrayal didn't break you. It changed you, but it didn't destroy you. And I think that's what Mark would actually want, if he could see past his own selfishness to understand what he put us through." The tentative reconciliation between the sisters marked the beginning of a new phase in Camilla's emotional recovery. With Annabelle's support, She began to find ways to honor the positive memories of Mark while acknowledging the reality of his choices. He wasn't all bad, she said during one of their conversations. The Mark who hurt us was real, but so was the Mark who made us laugh, who was there during Dad's funeral, who cried when I got married because he was so happy for me. Both versions of him existed, Annabelle agreed. And maybe learning to live with that complexity is what grief actually looks like. As the one-year anniversary of the scandal approached, palace advisors began discussing whether to mark the date publicly or allow it to pass quietly. The decision came from an unexpected source, Prince William, who requested a private meeting with Camilla to discuss the ongoing impact on his children. They've stopped asking about Uncle Mark, William told her during their conversation in his private office at Kensington Palace. George understands that he did something that put our family in danger, but Charlotte still asks when he's coming back for Christmas. The reminder of how Mark's actions had affected the youngest members of the family brought fresh pain to Camilla, but also reinforced her belief that they had made the right choice. I want you to know, William continued, that Catherine and I have never questioned your decision. What Mark did was unforgivable, and the way you've handled the aftermath has shown incredible strength and dignity. Coming from the future king, the approval meant more to Camilla than any public poll or media commentary. It confirmed that her sacrifice had served its purpose. The next generation of royals was safe, and the institution she had pledged to serve would survive. The anniversary passed quietly, marked only by a private service at their local church where Camilla prayed for Mark's well-being while acknowledging that she might never see him again. The priest, who had known the family for years, offered a simple but profound observation. Sometimes love requires letting go, even when our hearts resist. Public opinion about Camilla had shifted dramatically during the year. Early criticism about her failure to control her brother had given way to respect for her handling of an impossible situation. A poll conducted by the Times showed that her approval ratings had not only recovered, but actually exceeded their pre-scandal levels. The Queen has shown that true leadership sometimes means making decisions that bring personal pain for the greater good, wrote constitutional expert Professor Robert Blackburn. Her handling of this family crisis has demonstrated a maturity and strength that augurs well for the future of the monarchy. The transformation was perhaps most visible during Camilla's second anniversary as queen, marked by a ceremony at Westminster Abbey that had been planned long before anyone could have imagined the trials that would test her fitness for the role. As she stood before the altar where she had been crowned, surrounded by representatives from across the Commonwealth and all levels of British society, the woman who had once seemed uncertain about her place in royal history spoke with quiet authority about the nature of duty and sacrifice. The crown is not merely a symbol of privilege, she said in her anniversary address. It is a reminder that those who serve the people must sometimes choose duty over comfort, principle over convenience, and the greater good over personal desire. These choices are never easy, but they are what distinguish service from self-interest. In the congregation, Charles watched his wife with obvious pride, while Annabelle wiped away tears that mixed grief for their lost brother with admiration for the woman her sister had become. Absent from the ceremony, watching on television from a small apartment in Monaco, Mark Shan saw for the first time what his betrayal had cost not just his family, but himself. The sister he had mocked and exploited had become a figure of international respect, while he remained alone with his choices and their consequences. That evening, as Camilla and Charles hosted a reception for dignitaries and family friends, the Queen found herself thinking about parallel lives and roads not taken. In another version of events, Mark might have been there, making inappropriate jokes and charming guests with his irreverent humor. The family would have been complete, but at what cost to innocent people and institutional integrity? Do you think we would make the same choice again? Charles asked during a quiet moment between their public duties. Without hesitation, Camilla replied, and realized as she said it that her certainty was complete. Loving someone doesn't mean enabling their worst choices or allowing their mistakes to hurt innocent people. As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, Camilla stood on the palace balcony looking out over London, a city that had come to accept her as their queen through the crucible of crisis and the demonstration of character under pressure. The price of the crown had been higher than she had ever imagined when she first wore it. But in paying that price, she had discovered depths of strength and purpose that she might never have found in easier circumstances. Mark's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been transformative, burning away uncertainties and leaving behind something harder and more precious, a woman who truly understood what it meant to serve something larger than herself. In Monaco, her brother would continue living with the consequences of his choices. In London, she would continue living with hers, secure in the knowledge that when tested by the ultimate crisis, she had chosen correctly, even when that choice demanded everything she thought she couldn't sacrifice. The crown was safe, the institution was stronger, and the queen who wore it had earned her place in history not through bloodline or marriage, but through the crucible of impossible choices made with wisdom, courage, and an unshakable commitment to the greater good.